In the minds of millions of viewers around the world, Paul Hogan will forever be Mick Dundee, the rugged crocodile hunter, fearless and charismatic, who used a giant knife to conquer both the wilderness and the hearts of audiences everywhere. Hogan built an empire from a single character, transforming his name into a symbol of optimism and masculine resilience. Yet behind the dazzling success of Crocodile Dundee lay a darker reality that it would take nearly half a century for the hero himself to finally confront. At the age of 85, with time having softened the pride of stardom, Paul Hogan no longer wishes to hide behind stories of success. For the first time, he has begun speaking openly and honestly about his second marriage to Linda Kozlowski, a relationship that defined the peak of his fame, yet also became the blade that carved some of the deepest wounds of his private life. This is no longer the story of a wealthy man or a legendary actor. It is the reflection of someone standing on the far side of life's journey, confronting sacrifices and regrets that neither wealth nor fame could ever erase. In 1985, in a remote corner of Australia, fate arranged a meeting that would shape both Paul Hogan's career and some of his most enduring personal struggles. At the time, Paul was a popular Australian television star with a rough-edged charm, a man already beyond middle age who carried the natural confidence of someone seemingly born from the outback itself. Opposite him stood Linda Kozlowski, a young and elegant actress whose intellectual beauty reflected her education at the prestigious Juilliard School in New York. They appeared to be two parallel lines, unexpectedly crossing paths in one of the wildest places on Earth. The connection between them was far more than professional chemistry. It was an explosive attraction, a powerful force that extended far beyond the pages of a screenplay. Yet, while the world saw a glamorous and romantic couple, a personal upheaval was quietly unfolding behind the cameras. At that time, Paul Hogan was already a devoted family man, married to Noeline Edwards, the wife who had stood beside him since 1958 through his most difficult years, and the mother of the 5 children he had spent much of his life supporting and protecting. As their on-screen chemistry in Crocodile Dundee gradually evolved into real-life affection, Hogan found himself caught in a painful psychological conflict. The tension between his responsibilities as a husband and father and the temptation of a new relationship that seemed vibrant, exciting, and capable of offering both personal renewal and professional fulfillment. In 1986, as Crocodile Dundee swept through cinemas around the world and elevated Hogan to legendary status, he made a decisive and deeply consequential choice. He filed for divorce from Noeline. The separation marked not only the end of a 28-year marriage, but also a profoundly painful chapter for his family. Media attention was relentless. While many admired his extraordinary success, others questioned the character of a man who appeared willing to leave his past behind in pursuit of a new future. In 1990, Hogan and Linda were officially married. It was a moment when he believed he had achieved everything: a remarkable career, a beautiful young wife, and an exciting future in Hollywood. Yet beneath the celebration, few recognized the personal cost that accompanied it. The union of 2 different worlds, 2 generations, and 2 distinct outlooks on life created a brilliant beginning, while quietly concealing the seeds of future division. Caught up in the exhilaration of success, Hogan overlooked those warning signs. He believed his love was powerful enough to bridge every difference, only to discover that he had entered an adventure whose ending would bear little resemblance to the romantic films that had made him famous. After the dazzling glow of the early years faded, the gates of their luxurious Hollywood mansion gradually became a gilded cage for the marriage of Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski. At 51, Hogan was a man who had experienced both triumph and hardship. He longed for stability, for a traditional home where his wife would serve as a devoted partner and a dependable source of support after the long journeys of his career. He loved Linda in the way many protective men do, by surrounding her with beautiful homes, expensive gifts, and a sense of complete security. For Linda, however, who was only 32 and in the prime of her youth and ambition, that protection gradually began to feel restrictive. To the public, they appeared a perfect couple, a screen romance brought to life. Yet behind closed doors, Linda increasingly felt that she was losing her own identity. No longer was she simply a talented actress trained at Juilliard with artistic aspirations of her own. She had become Paul's wife and Dundee's partner. Conversations, interviews, and media attention revolved almost entirely around her husband's legendary status. Hogan's generosity, rather than making her feel cherished, created an invisible emotional distance. At times, she felt less like an equal companion and more like a treasured addition to his world. This quiet conflict intensified after the birth of their son, Chance. Hogan, whose traditional values ran deep, became even more committed to the idea of family life and hoped his wife would devote herself fully to their home. Yet within Linda, a struggle was unfolding between her responsibilities as a mother and wife and her desire to remain true to herself. Gradually, she began to feel isolated within her own home. Each morning, amid the silence of their multi-million-dollar estate, she became increasingly aware of an emotional emptiness she could not ignore. The connection she had once felt with the man she had fallen deeply in love with on set seemed to be fading. Between them, long silences began to emerge. They were not peaceful silences, but reflections of needs left unspoken and unmet. Hogan looked at his wife's unhappiness and could not understand why she felt dissatisfied despite a life of extraordinary comfort. Linda looked at her husband and felt that their love had become something preserved from the past rather than a living source of fulfillment. They resembled two passengers traveling on the same train while heading towards entirely different destinations. Hogan believed that providing security and material comfort would be enough to keep his wife close, yet he overlooked a fundamental truth. Linda did not need a gilded cage. She needed a kindred spirit to walk beside her. Within that silence, they gradually became strangers to one another, day by day, in a way that was both painful and increasingly impossible to reverse. In October 2013, Linda Kozlowski made a decision that sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. She filed for divorce from Paul Hogan, bringing to an end a 23-year journey filled with glamour, yet also marked by profound loneliness. The official reason cited was irreconcilable differences, a cold and familiar phrase that concealed an ocean of emotional wounds and years of quiet exhaustion. The collapse of their marriage did not happen overnight. It was the result of thousands of sleepless nights, countless conversations that led nowhere, and the painful realization that they had become two strangers living beneath the same roof. In 2014, the financial settlement arrived as a definitive conclusion to their bond. Hogan, with the instincts of a man who had built an empire, retained full control of the Crocodile Dundee character and his film production interests, the very soul of his career. Linda received a one-time settlement of $6.25 million. There was no ongoing spousal support and no continuing financial ties. On paper, it was a fair division. Emotionally, it represented the most painful kind of liberation. Linda's reaction after the divorce surprised the media. Rather than expressing bitterness or sorrow, she spoke of feeling as though she had found her own light. It was the sigh of relief of a woman who had spent more than 2 decades living beneath the enormous shadow of her husband and was finally ready to begin life again on her own terms. For Paul Hogan, however, the settlement marked the beginning of a far more difficult chapter. At the age of 74, he stood surrounded by immense wealth, yet felt as though he had lost the one thing that truly gave his life meaning. In later interviews, while Linda chose silence, Hogan offered a series of deeply reflective admissions. He acknowledged that the final years of their marriage had become emotionally empty. They lived together like silent housemates, separated by emotional walls built from indifference and unresolved grievances. It was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow, quiet, and deeply painful unraveling that unfolded over many years. After the final bond between them was severed, Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski embarked upon completely different paths, creating a striking portrait of what can happen when two people who once shared a life choose to move in opposite directions. Linda Kozlowski reinvented herself in a way that astonished many observers. Leaving behind the glamour of Hollywood, the very environment in which she had long been known primarily as Mrs. Hogan, she sought a quieter life in Morocco. There, she was no longer an actress confined to a familiar role. Instead, she became a successful entrepreneur, helping to build a luxury travel business alongside her new business partner, ULHollywoodLegendsUntold. Demonstrating considerable business acumen, she also turned towards property investment in Venice Beach, transforming her divorce settlement into a sustainable multi-million-dollar portfolio. Linda was no longer living in someone else's shadow. She had created her own path and become the leading figure in her own story. On the other side of that contrast, Paul Hogan's decline unfolded quietly and painfully. Following the breakdown of the marriage, the legendary crocodile hunter gradually withdrew into his home in Venice Beach. The rugged and adventurous image of Mick Dundee faded from public view, replaced by an elderly man in his 80s coping with muscle deterioration and chronic physical pain that affected his daily life. Physical suffering was not the only burden he carried. The later years of Hogan's life were also overshadowed by the prolonged tax investigations associated with Operation Wickenby between 2003 and 2012. The legal disputes consumed energy, damaged his peace of mind, and left lasting emotional scars. Although he continued living with his son Chance, the large house increasingly felt like a museum dedicated to memories of another era. Fame had once been his closest companion, yet in old age it became a weight he could not set aside, leaving him alone with the remnants of a brilliant but deeply complicated past. The contrast between their lives became remarkably stark. One found freedom through simplicity and renewal, while the other remained surrounded by the echoes of former glory. It became the conclusion of an adventure whose lessons endured long after it ended, a reminder that in life we sometimes sacrifice everything, only to discover that the greatest cost can be ourselves. At 85 years old, having traveled through nearly every triumph and hardship life could offer, Paul Hogan looked into the mirror and saw a very different Mick Dundee. The swagger of a conqueror had been replaced by the reflection of a man who had lost some of the things he valued most. No longer interested in protecting a flawless public image, he began speaking more openly during rare moments of reflection. He admitted a difficult truth. The wealth and fame he had spent a lifetime pursuing were ultimately fragile things when measured against loneliness. Hogan spoke candidly about what he viewed as one of his greatest mistakes, believing that providing financial security, magnificent homes, and a comfortable lifestyle was the same as expressing love. He acknowledged with deep regret that none of those things could replace the emotional closeness he had failed to nurture. He had been so occupied with becoming a legend to the world that he neglected the responsibility of being a true companion to the woman beside him. At 85, loneliness stood before him like an imposing wall. Though he remained a cinematic icon with considerable wealth and a permanent place in film history, he admitted that memories of Linda often returned when the world grew quiet. They were memories of the years in which they created extraordinary success together, and of the years in which they created profound unhappiness together as well. Their reunion in 2025 to promote a commemorative Crocodile Dundee project became an especially emotional moment for many fans. The public saw them standing side by side, professional, courteous, and smiling for the cameras, the image of two seasoned film stars. Yet beneath that polished appearance lay an unmistakable distance. Linda, now flourishing in a new chapter of her life, seemed to view him as part of a completed story. Paul Hogan, meanwhile, appeared to be an elderly man maintaining a smile while his thoughts remained anchored to memories from which he could never fully escape. He remains there today in his Venice Beach home, surrounded by reminders of a remarkable past, confronting a simple and painful truth. He once held the world in his hands, yet lost the woman he loved because he never fully learned how to understand her. Regret at 85 is not loud like a storm. It lingers quietly, like an old wound that never completely heals. A reminder that, in the end, people do not need legends. They simply need someone with whom they can grow old in peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If Paul Hogan's story has made you reflect on the balance between professional success and personal relationships, feel free to share your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so we can continue exploring more meaningful life stories together. Until next time.